All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 12th episode of the Wag Tales Podcast. I'm so excited this morning. I actually have Dr. Tom Brunzell joining me, which is an absolute privilege and pleasure. So welcome to the podcast, Tom.
Thanks for having me, Megan. I'm excited to be here.
So Tom, I would love for everyone just to know, who is Dr. Tom Brunzell? Tough question.
Uh, I always like saying I'm a teacher at heart, and I feel like everything that I have done since my time in the classroom has always been centered on students and helping young people who have struggled in the classroom. So when I say teacher, I think of things through classroom behavior, routines, transitions, and then that lifts up into the work that we do with adults and school staff and education leaders across the country.
And you've been on quite a journey, I think. We met, it would have been over 10 years ago now.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm sure people are picking up there's an accent here as well. So you weren't born in Australia. You came to Australia with a bit of a purpose. Just wondering if you want to talk about your journey into like what you do now and yeah, why you came to Australia.
Yes, I want our audience to know that you and I have known each other for years and years and years. And so I know we've supported each other for so many of those years. So I moved to Australia 13 years ago, and I was born in Vietnam, raised in Los Angeles. So that's where my accent comes from. And I arrived in Victoria from New York City, where I was a teacher and leader for many years. But I distinctly remember that you and I met each other on my first day of work. I drove down to the Noble Park campus of the Berry Street School, and there you were, and there I was. And we looked at each other and thought, what are we doing? We're going to do our best.
I love that. I didn't realize I actually met you on your first day of work. There you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was and the second day for those of us out there that know the Berry Street campuses, my second day of work went to Morwell, to the Morwell campus of the Berry Street School. And I just have to say, at time of recording, we're all celebrating because tomorrow we're going to celebrate the 20th birthday, the 20th anniversary of the Berry Street campuses.
Wow, that is crazy because I remember the 10th birthday.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, okay. Wow. That's amazing. Congratulations.
Congratulations to all of us, our staff, that past and present, and our emerging staff out there. We're excited to celebrate with our community tomorrow.
Oh, that's so good. How is everyone
Yeah.
celebrating? What's happening?
Well, we are doing a gathering and also we're showing off, which is pretty amazing. We're going to be showing off our new campus, which has been purposely renovated to support the needs of our young people in Mary Warren. So we opened this new campus approximately a year ago and change. And it was really an opportunity to take what we've learned through all of our research and practice and community of practice friends out there to think what are the kinds of things that our young people really, and I'm going to use this heavy-handed word, what do they deserve? What do we owe them as a community? I mean, these are young people who are struggling due to systemic influences, like I like to say, like we're never blaming them. But we also realized to support their education, we could do some really cool things with architecture and sensory spaces and the way that we really support the transition from class to class. So all of that has emerged in our new Nary Warren campus.
Amazing. So Tom, I know there'll be people listening that may not know much about the Berry Street schools. So I would love for you to maybe just describe what is the Berry Street School and who goes to the Berry Street School.
Yeah, totally. And of course, audience members, our friend Megan could also answer these questions because she's being very hosty and very honest right now. So, Megan, anything I miss, I would love for you
Well, look,
to.
Tom, to be honest, I haven't had someone come in and from Berry Street yet. So it's a good
Yeah,
chance for us both
awesome.
to talk about Berry Street.
Awesome, awesome, awesome.
Yeah.
So, we have both Megan and I have been and are part of Berry Street's legacy. So, we are 140 years in Victoria. We are primarily focused in our therapeutic and family services centered upon out of home care and out of home care concerns. And that also means that I have the privilege of working with a fleet of social workers, clinicians, psychologists, family violence support teams, infant mental health teams, and currently I'm the director of education. And that means that we have taken what we've learned through our own campuses, and I think I've mentioned two of the campuses. The other two are in Ballarat and Shepparton in Victoria. If you are listening beyond Victoria, that's really spread out across regional Victoria. And then we have taken the strategies and research that's emerged from our four campuses, and that has become the Berry Street education model. And now I lead that team. And surprise, surprise, and it surprised me. Our BSEM, Berry Street Education Model team, is now turning 10 next year.
Wow.
So it's been a decade since we have turned externally to help campuses, much like the Berry Street School across the country, and mainstream campuses. And now we also help early childhood staff as well.
Amazing. So much happening. Yeah, so Tom, I recall meeting you. I just had no idea it was your first day of work when we
It
did
really
meet.
was. It
But
really was.
before we met, there was no such thing as the Berry Street education model, essentially.
No,
And
no.
if I'm honest, like we were running quite blind sometimes at our campuses, doing whatever we thought organically should work for them and working together with a bunch of cool professionals to try our best to create something that would work. But honestly, I would like to acknowledge sort of what you have done and what you have brought to the Berry Street schools and to schools on a broader context as well, is with your work with BSEM. It's pretty
Well,
remarkable and
thank
pretty
you.
huge.
Well, the love fest is clearly going to continue in this conversation because I just know that when I moved here, I found just such hardworking people, including yourself, and we were doing our best. And I will say what has not changed is our values and the way that we prioritize the needs and strengths of young people. What has changed over so many years and so much trying and experimentation and failure and trying again is we are building the evidence and we're building into the evidence of what we think can really work. And that is just through a decade or 20 years of hard work. And one of the things that I have always considered since I started at Berry Street is how could we relook at every aspect of what's happening on this campus through a therapeutic lens? And that has a lot of names, right? I'm sure we'll talk about in this conversation the idea of trauma-informed practice or well-being informed or differentiated learning or individualized learning. But all of this for me is thinking, look, we as educators are not therapists, but everyone, no matter what your job is, can be therapeutically informed. And so that's what we strive to do for our young people.
Which I think is so powerful and so important as well. Because ultimately, we know these young people absolutely, and I'm going to use your word again, deserve to have access to the best education possible. And they deserve
Yes.
to have professionals who know what they're doing in that space as well.
And they deserve our system like getting its act together, which is, I know, so many of us have had experiences in the classroom are saying, all right, we have to strengthen the system itself. And that's
Mm.
our lifetime task, I think. But that's what our young people deserve is a system that works for them and that they should not be fighting the system itself. We as system actors should not be fighting our own systems.
Mm.
And so I think that's, the task, if we choose to accept it, that's kind of what I'm around here for.
Yeah, curious. Can we dive into that a little bit further then? What does that look like for you at the moment?
Oh, gee, okay, that's a nice question. Uh, Look, systems work, and I have heard the awesome genius of some of your guests so far. I know that you as a community are really thinking about systems, system-wide well-being, system-wide health, system-wide coordination. I know that you and I have spent years of our lives in care team meetings supporting students, and you look around that table, and there can be upwards of 12, maybe more people representing different aspects of a young person's care.
Mm.
And we're constantly trying to coordinate. And so, that's massive. it's hard. Look, my in my old age, I now describe systems work as like zillions of tiny micro moment actions, like zillions, like every email, every meeting, every text, every time you have to follow up on something 45 other times.
Mm,
That is all like tiny little carving out of the system or transformational moments within the system, and you don't see the ripples.
mm,
You may see them over 10 years or 20 years, but it's a bit of faith that what you're doing is worth it. Uh, my other sort of highfalutin idea these days when I talk about systems work is similar to what I know is so familiar to a lot of your listeners around regulation for learning and bottom up and top down integration for learning, the body, the brain, the mind. I see the system in the same way now, that the
mm.
system will not improve unless we coordinate top down, bottom up. Bottom up is those of us hardworking every day with young people. We know it works, we know it doesn't work. And then from the top down, we need to work toward an authorizing environment. And the great news is here in Australia, I see really promising things happening in state governments, within Commonwealth supports. It's not perfect and we have to work on it. But when I compare what's happening in our country compared to other countries that are like Australia around the world, this notion of like neoliberal schooling, accountability matrices, like all these things are making it so in other countries they just don't have the bandwidth to develop the practices that we are here. So
Mm.
I do feel a responsibility that the a lot of eyes are on what's happening here because we have the opportunity to innovate in these spaces. So that to me is systems work. It's
Yeah,
tireless.
absolutely. And it's huge. And it always sounds a little bit scary when we just start talking about the system, but I always think it's important to go there as well.
Yeah, sure thing.
But the BSEM team, 10 years chipping away in the system as well. Can we talk about what's happened with BSEM over the last 10 years? How did
Sure.
it begin and where are we at now?
Yeah. You know what? It really does start with the Berry Street School. And I'm really glad that we started our conversation that way. And then when we had the opportunity to begin to share our work with other community schools. And I always want to be really conscious that our practice and research that underpins BSEM took place on Gunai Kurnai land and also Wurundjeri country. And that is important because these are communities that were doing their best, and we wanted to learn from those communities and help the communities. And so what started with two schools that were sort of our first pilot schools, that has now evolved to be schools in all states and territories. And so that is awesome. I also want to just I'll do shout outs, particularly for our Victorian friends. Um, that we have communities like Frankston North. Frankston North is of great concern to many of us. And it's a community that contends with generational inequity and, again, deserves all of the best of what we have. And these are schools now where every school, every teacher in Frankston North has learned the Bear Street education model. And now we're focusing on transitions. So as students go from primary school up to secondary college, what are some of the consistent things that the staff members are going to do to ensure that that transition is as supportive and relational and regulated for the young people as can be? And I can't, as a researcher, I'm putting on my researcher lecturer hat now because, hi. Uh, I've learned that from our great team members to be aware of liminal spaces, transition spaces, and these spaces that are these transition spaces between one campus to the next, or from classroom to
Mm,
classroom, or this idea of elevators and escalators. Like those are the unpredictable spaces, and those are the spaces where we're uncertain and we're getting from A to B. And so I think, when we think about systems work, I think it's pretty cool to think, how do we bring that sense of rhythm and centeredness to those transition spaces? I just want to give a shout out to Andy on our team. Thank you for that prompt.
You really just triggered something in me too, that we had an
Yeah.
elevator at the last school I worked at, and so much happened in that elevator.
Oh, I'm holding my head on my hands right now because I mean, at every school I ever go to, frankly, here's like a trade secret. I walk around the school and instantly my risk management head looks for all the hidden spaces. I'm
Yeah.
like, uh-oh, that's a blind space. You can't see back there. You're like elevators. Yikes. And what
Yeah.
did you do
Oh, it was just
to work
always like
around
young
it?
people loved getting in there, and then always just finding a way to, shut down the elevator, and it's stuck between floors, and like we'd have to call someone out to get them out.
Oh. I'm rolling up my sleeves. I want to go over and help that situation with relief.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't meant to be accessible to everyone, but,
Yeah,
young
exactly.
people always love to find a
Oh,
way.
we call that the strength of persistence
Yeah.
sometimes.
And it's creativity. They always find a
Oh
way. It's
yes,
great.
yes it is.
Yeah. So Tom, as well, people may not know much about what you did before you came out to Australia too. And I always found that really interesting. Like I learnt so much from you based on the practice you'd done before you even arrived in Australia too. So I'm wondering if you wanted to go there and share a little bit about that.
Oh yeah, sure thing. So I was a teacher for many years in the Bronx and then a school leader in Harlem with a team of dedicated leaders who we were able to start a school back then and still today. They're called charter schools. I won't make this a lecture about charter schools. Every school is very different. Ours was special, I'd like to think. And I had a really interesting opportunity because I know the communities that you travel in, Megan, that I was very fortunate to be in the right place at the right time to become one of New York City's first, what did not have a name, but now I realize I was a positive education leader, helping coordinate and implement positive education across the network of New York City schools. But back then we just called it Marty stuff because really, truly, there wasn't a moniker for this collection of ideas and evidence base. But I did have the opportunity to work very closely with Marty Seligman and Angela Duckworth. And I was a research manager for Angela for a few years as we thought about how to increase self regulation and goal setting in our campus in Harlem. And after really, really falling very, well, I'll say falling in love, falling deeply with the research around what we could do around well being and education, and that well being and education are integral to one another. They are the same thing in a lot of ways. And I always think, particularly for students that we serve at Berry Street, which I know so many, many campuses are across the country, that learning is well-being. Like they need the students, the young people have to feel like their time and effort is worth it, and that they feel like they're learning things that are useful and important to them. That this notion of positive education and well-being education was a thing. And then I met Berry Street, and some folks from Berry Street came to see what we were doing in New York City. They made a long trip, and what I learned from Berry Street was that I had a lot to learn, and that Berry Street had been very much developing what has now become trauma informed practice for organizations, for therapeutic work. And then I've had the opportunity to contribute to our knowledge in trauma informed education and trauma informed classrooms.
And I really love that marriage between the trauma informed practice and the pos ed. And
I
I
appreciate that.
know that that's been your work and your journey since you've been here. And I know that's your PhD and your
Yeah,
book that you've recently
thank you
published
very
as
much.
well. Yeah, so that was actually really impactful to me as a teacher at the time. That was sort of where a lens really started to shift for me, was when we were meeting and you started introducing a lot of the pos ed work to us as a staff level first. And that was really important as well. That was a huge learning for me too, was when you first started rolling this out with us as a staffing team at the schools, was that we were doing it first at that level before we would bring it out to the young people. So we could live and breathe it and understand it ourselves as well, and really embed it in our own practices before we started really thinking about applying it to the young people too. And I think that
I
that's a really
appreciate
important
that.
point. Yeah.
Thank you.
And it was a
Uh,
huge turning point for me too, because I'm sure that this is what influenced where my studies went and what I do as well. So I had no idea the pos ed world existed until you came and you got us to look at our character strengths and really dive deep into the work from there.
it was emerging. I mean, it continues to develop, but there's, it's both fun, rigorous, confusing, frustrating, expansive when you are learning a new sort of part of the science and the evidence. And, this notion of trauma informed positive education was trying to connect a single narrative for people like us,
Mm,
to say, look, if trauma informed practice really can responsibly help us understand how to meet the needs for learning in healthy ways around one's self regulatory needs or relational needs, and those are important priorities, not just for being a human being, but for learning things together in classrooms. I think that what drew me, and maybe you, but I certainly want to hear from you as well, like, is that the well-being work reminds us of what's right with ourselves and what's
mm,
right with kids and what's strong about our kids. And I know that you've had many moments when you meet a young person, at any time in your career, and then you ask them, well, what are your strengths? And they look at you and they say, I don't have any, that's why I'm
mm-hmm.
here. And I just think it's a moment of real truth that this person, this little human, has been on our planet and they don't know what's right with them and they don't know their strengths. I mean, is that I have to think that that's what's drawn you to this various field as well.
Oh,
Yes.
completely. And the strengths language part of it is such a huge part of it, because ultimately what we're doing is we're allowing the people to start a new narrative from there,
Yeah.
as well. And it's so powerful to see that shift. And something that really jumped out to me too was always that work with Corey Keyes. So Corey
Oh,
Keyes'
yeah.
dual mental health continuum is really impactful for me when I look at these young people in these schools, because often we separate what's going on for them and go, they need a clinical intervention, they need mental health support, and that's where it begins and ends. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
actually, no, that's not enough. That's nowhere near enough. And let's inject some wellbeing skills and resources there too, and let's watch things shift for them even further. And I think that that's a huge
I
motivator of mine.
also I appreciate that because even, when we as educators hear the word, oh, they need clinical intervention, well, that is probably correct and probably helpful. I mean, I don't know every student out there, but also as an educator, if you hear that, you think, oh, well, I am not a clinician. I was trained as a
Mm,
teacher person. So my vista is not mental health and, psychosocial assessment. Like that's not our practice. Our practice is something else. And I saw too many educators that I was supporting kind of give up a little bit and think, well, I'm not a clinician. I don't quite understand. We're waiting for a diagnosis. But we know that there was so much more we could do to create the therapeutic environment and to also create an environment where young people could meet their own needs in healthy ways that are appropriate for teachers to enact. And that was very much the centerpiece of what has become the Berry Street education model as well.
mm. And the huge part of that too is it's so good for the teacher wellbeing then too, because they don't feel powerless or like everything has to pause until that young person gets clinical support. It's like, well, actually, here's what I can do in the classroom, and I can be confident in what I'm doing is going to actually help that young person. And I'm going to be less stressed as a teacher as well, because I know there are things I can do, and I'm going to see the young person slowly begin to improve in their well-being as well as we journey along together. So I think it's hugely impactful for teacher well-being as well if we can go there.
Oh, yes. I mean, look, teaching is hard. It is hard. It is, teaching is hard. Teaching is not what it was 20 years ago. It
Mm,
wasn't what it was 10 years ago. Who the heck can remember before COVID? I don't. I mean,
mm,
really, my
mm,
my my mind. I'm sort of haunted by research that suggests that we, especially in Victoria, who experience, continuous lockdowns, blah blah, our memory is similar to that of an incarcerated person
mm,
in terms of we don't have markers and, sort of the rhythms of life. And so that creates a need for all of us to realize, okay, what does it mean to have a sense of workplace well-being and professional and personal well-being in 2024? where education is evolving, the young people are evolving, the world is more complex, and all of us are. I like to use a terminology from the social science research, service rationing. All of us are trying to do a job to create equity in communities, and we don't have enough fill in the blank. We don't have enough time, money, consistent
Mm.
staffing.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have enough materials or resources, yet we're still doing it. And that takes its toll vicariously, and the secondary stress that we are exposed to day in and day out. So it's an incredible profession, which requires, I think, a revisioning of what we are doing every day. And I guess, again, I think I've said this already in the conversation, narratives, like the narrative for practice change, I think, for hardworking people has to feel like a unified one. I get out of bed to take care of myself so I can be there for the students and I can be there for the community. And that's a singular journey toward well being in the system. Now, I've just said a lot of big words, all strung together, but it's something that I think about when we're designing interventions and designing strategies for schools.
Mm. It's an interesting one as well, because what you were saying there about getting out of bed and doing what you need to do so you can, bring your best to the young people as well. I'm curious, Tom, what your practice looks like working in this space. If you would like to go there as well, what's your wellbeing practice look like?
Sure. I've Please forgive me if you've heard me say this before, but I'm trying to spread this out. So Megan, you and I are sitting on a mountain of peer-reviewed publications in terms of what we read and what we follow and what we've underlined and highlighted. What I'm about to share has not come from any of those. Um, so I was struggling in my own well-being, and I went to a physiotherapist, and I was very mean to her, and I said, "Don't tell me to find more work-life balance." And she said, "Okay, okay, okay." I said, "Because I love my work, and my work is very much my sense of accomplishment is part of my well-being." And she said, "All right, find balance in the work. When you are sitting, sit in your center. When you're driving, remember to breathe. When you're speaking to people, remember how you're holding your body and to feel balanced in the conversation." So I'm continuously sharing that with everybody because all of us are time poor. We all are very tired at the end of a long day. So I think it can be more stressful to be told, "Oh, you're not doing enough. You need to find more something in your life." But I think, yes, I can find more balance in myself as I do things throughout my day.
You're speaking my language so much
Oh,
here.
good.
I'm really
What's
tired.
yours?
Oh, I'm just really tired of the rhetoric of like prescribing teachers self-care almost. It's like an extra thing they have to go and do. Like, what's your self-care
Yeah.
activity? Go and do it. And I'm
Yeah.
way more about what can we do within our day, that's just going to help us
Oh,
in those
yes.
like little
Yeah.
micro moment shifts as well. And that's what I always often share with people. Because ultimately what you touched on there is a really important point too, that the work is part of the well-being a lot of the time. We
It
hear it
has
a
to be.
lot of the time when we're hearing from a lot of these people, they're really passionate about what they do. And there's a lot of meaning generated from that. And that is really good for their well-being. But what we need to think about is how do we protect them to continue to show up and feel well at work. And yeah, a lot of it is around those micro moment shifts is what I always talk about when I'm working with teachers, essentially.
I
Yeah.
certainly agree. Look, well-being is a mosaic. It is a multifactorial concept. Choose your words here. It is a stained glass window. It's a mandala. It's a lot of things, right? And so I don't want anyone's own personal definition of well-being to be bounded. A lot of us access well-being through our animals. We
Hmm.
access it through nature. We access it through the fun staff barbecue or going to the movies with our friends. And I don't want to discount that. That's really important to build positive emotion, connection, and fill in perma blank H here. But that's an inside thing. But I think where my own work, just like yours, is centered upon is, yes, we need to do the positive emotion extras. If you don't have little boosts like that, then you won't remember what it feels like to feel well. But I am very, very much more focused on, what does effective workplaces, what do they actually look like? So the
Mm,
workplace itself is a system that's healthy, a system that creates healthy transitional spaces, a system that has routines within it to support the rhythmic community or the rhythmic school. And two fun facts, I think, is I wanted to boost as much research into this as possible. We understand from social service research that the more trauma informed training one has, the more well being training one has to even understand what trauma informed well being even is, then you are more aware and more conscious that that's even a thing. So I think that's step one. And then one of my first studies, and I want to attribute this to my friends, also co-authors and research supervisors, Professors Lee Waters and Professor Helen Stokes, that we were able to suggest that when teachers impacted by secondary and vicarious stressors feel more effective in the classroom with strategies for on-task learning, and when teachers witness students setting ambitious goals for themselves, that's when our own workplace well-being is truly fortified. So this notion of professional practice and professional pedagogies, relational pedagogies, trauma-informed pedagogies, those are integral to well-being itself, and that's for of the adult. And we want to keep adults standing up, connected, and doing the work. And I have a sneaky feeling that that will be sort of the vista of where my research goes for a while.
yeah, and I love that. And I actually am so glad you brought that up as well, because I was going to try and weave that in there somewhere around that body of work that you and Lee Waters and Helen Stokes did, because that actually really influenced a lot of my research and work that I
Oh,
did when I was in
thanks.
my master's as well. Yeah, so that paper was really impactful to me as well,
Thank you.
looking at the meaningful element too of the work and how that was actually a buffering effect for teachers for their well-being, which is a
Yeah,
huge thing. Yeah, and
it's yeah.
so I was just going to say, so I'm speaking a lot of the same language as you, because I feel like there's a lot of great practices we can do for our well-being in our personal lives, but it has to sort of marry a lot of other things too. It shouldn't just be I'm doing this just for my well-being. It's like I might be doing it because it creates joy and it creates connection, and it's part of my hobbies and my life anyway. But I'm a huge fan of that idea of that boosting the positive emotion can actually take place in the workplace as well, based on the rituals and routines that we can create with our colleagues as well. And it can take just 5 seconds just to like have a great prompting question and have a bit of a laugh with the team in the morning, or celebrate a birthday or whatever it might look like, just really briefly, can definitely boost the positive emotion for the day too.
Joy is an important part of our work that we don't get to
Huge
see a
part.
lot.
Yeah, huge part. And celebrating those wins is a huge part of it too. Yeah,
Absolutely.
young people can bring a smile to the face throughout the day, and you need to savor it and acknowledge it when it happens. Yeah. So Tom, as well, I'm really interested to hear, like, because you just touched on the fact that there's going to be a bit more research going on. So is that something that you are still diving into, and what's that side of your life look like at the moment?
Yes, we are always forging some new ideas. I'd like to think now in terms of trauma informed education, well being informed, strengths based education. We might be in generation 2 or 3 now in terms of, there is an evidence base, we're building it. We are evaluating it longitudinally. A lot of people and research teams around the world are picking this up. Australia, I think, is very much leading the way. Um, but there's a lot more work to be done. The future directions of this field depend on new spaces. I think specifically what really lights up our team are two specific, or I should say, three specific areas. One is, what does trauma informed education really mean when we look at neurodiversity,
Mm,
disability, and inclusion practices? Often I find that our special educators are very much speaking the same language or leading us forward, and we want to make sure that the connective practices make sense in terms of supporting young people who are contending with both a learning need and also trauma's impacts, perhaps, on their family systems. That's one area that is quite promising for us. The second is to ensure that culturally responsive education and culturally responsive work out there in communities is very much learning from trauma-informed practices and two ways learning. And so we're very proud of the support that our teams have given to Aboriginal communities, Aboriginal educators, the side-by-side learning that's occurred together in communities. And so I understand that perhaps the words trauma-informed practice are very much a Western way of looking at things, and that is not trying to prioritize that, but to understand the real exchange of ideas and the valuing of First Nations culture and our super diverse schools in many, many locations across our world now. What does it mean to have a trauma-informed, culturally responsive practice to value the strengths and real opportunities for all of our young people? I think that's a vista. That's exciting for us.
That's huge. Can't wait to see where it goes.
Yeah, me too. We're working hard.
So, Tom, time flies when we're recording a podcast. We're coming close to the end of our time together. And as I let you know, we do have 5 questions that we sort of dive into at the end of a podcast. But before we do, I just wanted to see, was there anything else you wanted to touch on before we go there? Oh my
gosh, I am ready for these questions. I will admit that I've heard some of them in your prior episodes, but also I just want to say, of course, already, thank you. I mean, you've really hosted an opportunity for me to share so much of our work already. So thank you.
Oh, I'm just so glad to have you here. It's been quite a long time of knowing each other, and I think there's so much people can learn from you. So I was really excited that you were keen to jump on. All right, well, let's dive into those questions. Okay. So as you know, don't stress about the answers too much. Just go gut answers, and but if you've heard them, you know what's coming. So Tom, what did you want to be when you were a kid?
That's easy. I wanted to be a teacher. I was the bossy oldest brother in the family and forced my siblings to sit up straight and check out library books from our family library. And my mom was a teacher, and I didn't even realize that really until I became a teacher. And I remember calling her saying, okay, now I know why you did all those things you did in our home. So I was a very blessed to be raised as a teacher and to spread the good word now.
I love that. So it's always been the path.
Yes, it always was.
The second question is, what are your 2 top values? And you can only choose 2.
Oh, gee. Okay. I'm going to get serious because I care about this a lot. I value democracy, and I never thought, as a dual citizen, I never, ever thought that would be the rallying cry in the 2020s, that to fight for democracy, to fight for all of what that really means around equity, and to fight dominator values, authoritarianism around the world, that education is this thing to teach collective values and collective respect. So that's my first long-winded answer. The second I have learned is to value culture and to understand and see culture as a strength in communities.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. All right, the third one is a little bit funny. So if you've heard, hopefully you're ready for this one. If you were going to have a boxing fight, what would be your walkout song?
Yeah, okay. So I have 2 answers. You're
allowed to have 2.
Okay, thank you. And I want you to answer this too, of course. My first is I'm obsessed with the Breeders, and so Cannonball, and I have this like bass line in my head as I walk out to things, and then the guitar kind of runs up and I'm like, yes, I'm ready for things. My favorite song in the whole wide world is Freedom by George Michael, and on some level I'm pretending to be Linda and Christy Turlington in the middle of the video.
I could see that working.
Okay, thank you very much. And what's yours, Megan? What's your fight song?
Well, I actually did have a boxing fight with a walkout song a couple of years ago. Yeah, so it was part of the thing. So it's pretty funny. I walked out to Gangsta's Paradise.
Awesome. Of course.
But it was all kind of tied in with the theme of, I had a fight name and it was Corcoran Punishment. So it's kind of blending the whole, tough teacher thing together. And yeah, so it was all a bit of a joke, but it worked.
And you've earned it, by the way.
So the fourth question, if you could collaborate with anyone in the field, dead or alive, who would it be?
Cool. I am very much inspired by Rudolf Steiner.
Mm.
And I often think in my journey through Steiner education and Steiner pedagogy, gosh, what would it have been like to be in 1919 in Stuttgart, Germany, when Steiner was gathering the first college of teachers to create a small school that was really in response to factory and industrialization in communities. And I just think, oh my gosh, that was over 100 years ago.
Mm.
And oh, what does it mean now for us as we are very much trying to address factory education, AI, and everything else that is mechanized around us? So that's one fantasy. I do have a second answer, though. I am like collaboration with anyone. The artist Jenny Holzer is a favorite of mine. So
Amazing.
if you're out there, Jenny, and listening to this, I am here to collaborate with you.
I love that. I hope your wish comes true.
Yeah, thanks.
And the last question is, if you could make one recommendation as a step that everyone could take towards healing, what would it be?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure it was Chris Peterson, but you'll have to remind me, Megan, if I'm incorrect, that really discussed that well-being is about other people and connecting to things greater than yourself. Am I correct on that?
You are correct.
You're
I actually played a
that?
video of him saying those exact words to my Monash students very recently.
There you go. I mean, we certainly attribute this to the giants that have come before us, and Chris certainly is one of those people. And I've always thought about that, and this notion that will define perhaps in the well-being research is meeting one's spiritual needs is connecting to something greater than yourself. So if you belong to a faith tradition, or that faith tradition is part of your own rhythms or your family or community rhythms, and that's part of your well-being. And for those of us who have perhaps sacred rhythms for ourselves, whether that's in nature or being with our animals, for me, it's around being in art museums. I have to say that my favorite art, it's not an art museum, but it's close to one. My favorite interior space in Australia is the High Court building in Canberra. And I think I'll end with this. When I was in Canberra as a tourist, and I was not going to go in the High Court building. And this man ran out and said to his wife, who was watching their baby, oh my gosh, you got to go in there. It's like Tron meets Blade Runner in there. I was like, oh my gosh, I got to get in there. And so I was in that High Court building thinking, yes, I'm in my like concreted dynamic architecture environment. So that gives me well-being, connecting to environments and the genius of architects who are doing it well for us.
So interesting. Thank you so much, Tom. It's been such a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody.